So thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the introduction. Yeah, as Alexander already told you, that my profession is more the sociology of work and organizations. So it's more like my view on platform labor and workplace democracy is pretty much empirical and not that much normative. But I'm really much interested in normative questions and theoretical questions. And I just finished my PhD on the subject, and I pretty much did it especially on, you already know, the food delivery riders and so on, and where I did a lot of empirical research. Also, I delivered a lot of pizzas in many different cities, so I tried to do it like a participant observation and so on, and I also did empirical research on other platforms, and also did a study on workers' voice and platform labor in general. So what I try to do here is to give an overview of platform labor, of workers' voice, and so on, and how is it at the moment, and then we can try to see where the interest is and where the discussion will go. So, and my point is here a little bit that in platform labor we kind of have these kind of two-faced characters. So on one hand we have this kind of opportunities, and on the other hand you have the barriers for workplace. It's kind of the same time it's a testing ground for new forms of control of labor. You probably heard algorithmic management and so on, and at the same time testing old and also development of new forms of workers' voice. And just to introduce the phenomenon, a CEO of a labor platform, Crowdflower's labor platform, he identified kind of platform labor kind of in a nutshell in this quote, where he said, before the internet it would be really difficult to find someone, sit them down for 10 minutes and get them to work for you, and then fire them after those 10 minutes. But with technology, you can find them a tiny amount of money and then get rid of them when you do not need them anymore. This kind of platform labor in a nutshell. And you also have in the quote CEO Jeff Bezos, when he presented his own platform, Amazon Mechanical Turk, he said, you've heard of software as a service, now this is humans as a service. So this and platform labor and work in general, it becomes kind of a computation service. You can touch with the touch of a button, you kind of can access different workers and different qualifications and so on. And with this kind of platform labor, it's not a totally new phenomenon. It kind of fits into general different trends. And one of these trends is the steady growth in non-standard employment seen in the last decades. And also that what we call the fissuring of the workplace. So this is kind of a platform, kind of a new form of work, which kind of deviates from the standard employment relationship. And with this also from standard forms and the best well-known forms of representation. The important thing that at the same time, platform labor has rapidly emerged as one of the most vibrant and exciting areas of labor organizing, as other scholars write. So this is kind of side of platform labor. And where we can see, and you probably know this kind of all these protests you have in many countries, especially from Uber or food delivery sector and so on, where you have many different forms of workers' voice. So we have these two opposing interpretations, and the subject itself is also very important. It's also discussed as kind of an early glimpse into evolve in after the coming over the coming days, as Sundararajan writes. So, and with this in mind, I first of all I try to introduce platform labor a little bit more, try to define it, what the characteristics of platform labor are, and in very broad definition, it's paid work managed via online platforms. So you already talked about it, Uber, Deliveroo, Mechanical Turk, all these different platforms. So you have a platform for almost every form of labor, and these different forms of platform labor, they can be distinguished, and the most important aspect is the different space in which it is located. So therefore it pretty much makes a huge difference with regard to the available voice option and the strategies if the labor is scattered all over the globe, as you have it with crowd work, or if it is in limited urban spaces with people transport, food delivery, and so on. And qualification is also important, but not that much. And now when we talk about, okay, how big, how important is this phenomenon even? Is it maybe only a new buzzword, or everybody's talking about, and so on? And is it really that important? I have to say, I don't know, because the actual size is pretty much unknown. So we do not know how big platform labor is, because it's pretty much kind of a moving target that runs counter to these established survey practices. So we have this kind of statistical voids. There are no really reliable statistics on platform labor. And also, especially with these standard administrative data you could have on traditional labor platform, labor forms, we have no data. However, what we can say is that in various studies, it's assumed that we have a rapid and progressive growth of the platform. Or as the MIT writes, everywhere there can be a platform, there will be a platform. And you probably always have saw it in your everyday life, that you get in contact with many of these different platforms, and all these platforms they pop up everywhere and so on. And all of this in the last 10 years. So now the other aspect is that even though we do not know how this phenomenon is, despite this, it's very irrelevant because of its role as kind of an organizational avant-garde. And the point is, okay, what does this mean, organizational avant-garde? This means especially these special characteristics, how platforms mediate labor, and that labor is now mediated via platforms. So because usually, as you know, relationships between employer and employee, they're usually kind of bilateral. So you have, on the one hand, you have the employer, you have the employee, and so on. You have social dialogue or relationship and work relationships and so on. And in platform labor, it is usually multilateral. So you have the workers, then you have the people or the companies which are interested in the service or the labor, and then there's a platform which kind of joins as a matchmaker or as the mediating actor and so on. And what we then see with the platforms is kind of an organizational shift from hierarchies to markets. So for more and more, markets are used and not hierarchies to organize labor. So it's kind of the border from where the company starts and the market ends is moved further into the organization. So platforms work with only kind of this small administrative staff and a huge crowd of these self-employed workers. So that's why we see this rapid growth of the platform. So Uber, for instance, they just have to open a small office in a country, or they don't even do that, and they start their service. They just start their platform, their app in the country. And this development for the shift from hierarchies to markets is a development we've seen before with, for instance, outsourcing and so on. But with platform, this trend is kind of radicalized. And for the platforms, for the platform workers, it leads to what you probably already know, this extreme flexibility, shifting of risk to workers, and income stability, as Stefano writes. And also really much important is that platform workers have no representational rights. So the question of workplace democracy becomes pretty much important here. And what I do now is here that I will look at worker silence and workers' voice. So first, the workers' fragmentation as something like an obstacle to the representation of workers' voice, platform workers. And here we see different forms how platform workers are fragmented, and what kind of hinders them as a barrier for them to get forms of workers' voice. The first and really important is the legal fragmentation, because platform labor, as I already told and you already know, is based on self-employed workers. So here in the IPO, so when Uber entered on the IPO, when they went to the stock exchange market, and they wrote really very openly that our business would be adversely affected if drivers were classified as employees instead of independent contractors. So this means this kind of self-employment is really much part of the platform model, labor model, and this self-employment fits to the kind of, it's also something we knew before, we have seen before, and now with platformization we have kind of radicalization. So it fits to this general trend we see in many countries and many fields and sectors, as it's called like an escape from employment law. So more and more labor relations, they are not anymore regulated under employment law. And as a result, platform workers are excluded from social protection and collective bargaining and so on. And because, of course, these are usually only for employees. And additionally, the situation becomes even more bleak since platform workers are self-employed, and as such, they are not allowed to form and not allowed for any form of collective action. Because if self-employed workers are employed, they are kind of counted as a company with one person in it, and and if they connect with each other, they would form a monopoly, and therefore antitrust law prevents workers' voice in this part. But actually, this is a point where the EU Commission started a reform in the last 2 years, which is not finished, but especially with the intention to give platform workers and self-employed the opportunity for collective action. And additionally, we have the effect of regime shopping. So especially this comes for crowdwork platforms, so platforms where the workers are scattered all over the world. They can relocate the activities when some form of regulation comes to them or something like this. So this is legal fragmentation. A little bit shorter, but not less important, is spatial fragmentation, obvious. So platform labor is kind of, you see kind of a delocalization. So it's kind of this, what we call platforms are kind of factories without walls. So all we usually see in labor relations, in a factory, in an office or so, that people interact with each other, communicate with each other. They build these, what Fantasia calls the cultures of solidarity. All of this becomes less likely when you have the workers scattered either in a city, in a small urban space, or all over the world. Then we have organizational fragmentation. Organizational fragmentation. This is kind of a precondition for platform labor, is that you have this kind of standardization, the modularization, and this codification of labor, and kind of a tailorization also. And when these labor processes are tailorized like this, the platform workers are also separated from each other. And additionally, what we also see, that platform workers are put in direct competition with each other. So when you're working on a platform, you're usually competing with other platform workers for either shifts, for either jobs, or for reputation to get shifts and jobs and so on. You have to build this reputation, and you have to be better as the other platform workers. And another aspect is, of course, technological fragmentation. It's what we usually know, and you probably heard of algorithmic management with algorithms. So kind of an automation of management, which controls workers and again minimizes human-to-human communication. So usually you don't, when I worked as a traditional career, and there you have to talk a lot to other guys in the office and so on. But when you work as a food career, you only have this app, and this app tells you, the algorithm tells me automatically where you have to go and what you have to do. And this, at the same time, this makes workers' voice very unlikely and undermines resistance and representation. And because these infrastructures of participation, for instance, the app or something like this, they are now digital. You do not talk and interact with other people, and they are always non-transparent. There's non-transparent black boxes for the workers. So, or in other words, you could say you cannot bargain with an algorithm. It's really a problem, and a problem for industrial relations, how to deal with algorithms. And the last aspect is social fragmentation, because what we see in platform labor is a very high diversity of workers, due to their high heterogeneity, very pronounced fluctuation. So usually most of the people do not do this job for many years, or they don't expect to do it in, I don't know, 5 years. And then the often predominant part-time character. So almost not that many people do this full-time, and often you cannot do this job full-time, because only in specific times it's possible to do this job or like this. And because of this, you have very high diversity, and you have no common interests often, and often you have no interest in representation at all, because this job is usually, and for many people, only a side gig. And so the exit option from this job is kind of more obvious, the more obvious strategy for workers than the voice option. So as a result from this fragmentation, pretty much have kind of worker silence. Workers are the platform workers are very heterogeneous social group with little legal protection. And they carry out their work in pretty much in isolation, have little opportunity to interact with each other. So this is the one side. But now when you just heard it from me, and you probably read the news and so on, you always often hear of protests from workers and so on. And then that's despite this extent of fragmentation, workers' voice exists in platform labor on many different levels and many different forms. And this I try to give you an insight or overview over all the different practices and forms of workers' voice. So first of all, despite these high fragmentation, what we see is that platform workers are in contact with each other, sometimes quite actively. And this is especially since digitalization allows for new ways of communication. So what the platform workers do is they establish kind of worker-led discourses from below. There exist many different chats and forums. So and so a survey I did on German food couriers came to the result that only 7% of German food couriers stated that they had no social contact with their colleagues, even though the labor process itself, so the platform labor process, it does not want you to interact with other workers. But despite and nevertheless, the workers are in many, they see each other, they talk with each other, there are many chat groups and so on. And the reason for this communication is first, that the workers try to understand the rules of the game. So they try to make sense of the platform's algorithm and their structures. And this is often really kind of necessary to get to make money on these platforms and so on, because the structures in the algorithm, they're always changing. And at the same time, this is the other part, and this kind of these sense making is kind of the starting point, but from this on, and the same time, these communication structures, they can serve as a nucleus of collective action. So when you look at all the protests we see in platform labor, all these works councils you see, especially in Germany and Austria and so on, and they often really much began in these chat groups. So we first had these chat groups, and from the chat group, the people talk with other talked about the discontent and so on, and then started to some protests and so on. And the other aspect would be traditional forms of workers' voice, and this is kind of a challenge because, as here Eurofound writes, existing industrial relations and social dialogue structures are often not a good fit with platform work. So, and this is, yeah, as you expected, you do not have very much many collective agreements, because of course platform workers are self-employed, and collective agreements are usually not for self-employed. You have some, and mainly in Scandinavia, so typical varieties of capitalism phenomenon, that you have some collective agreements, but usually only in these local forms of platform labor. And then you have, especially as I told you before, you have some works councils in Germany and Austria where they are common, mainly in the sector of food delivery. They were highly challenged and still are highly challenged from the companies and the platforms. And then you additionally see in this sector that the trade unions only very slowly adapt to platform workers. They have limited resources. They have not more members. They have not won members in the last 10 years usually. So they are not keen to open up to new fields, and especially not fields they don't know how they are working and what they can expect and so on. The traditional trade unions are usually very slow in this kind of sense. And this kind of makes kind of a vacuum, open space for other actors. And here we have especially alternative actors, alt labor actors here, as these are often kind of grassroots unions, and they often focus very much on industrial and direct industrial actions. So probably, you know, maybe the IWGB is in UK, in Germany is the anarcho-syndicalist union, the FAU, or you have in Spain, you have the Intersindical Alternativa de Catalunya, and so on. So in every country, you have these smaller unions, and sometimes only kind of active in only parts, on some cities, only regions, and so on. And additionally, at the same time, you have these many social media initiatives from platform workers, and they serve like something as voice, as a contact portal, and also as like trying to do an agenda setting in the media. So you have, for instance, the Uber London Drivers Network, or in Germany, you have a Liefern am Limit. And Liefern am Limit was kind of a Facebook homepage, a Facebook site where many people, many food delivery workers were active. And now a traditional trade union co-opted this Facebook site. So there you have one example where one traditional trade union kind of opened up for this, but they did this by co-opting this existing project. So with its alt labor unions and these alt labor actors, the thing is that this initiative, they are kind of very agile, but however, they have very limited resources. They have no collective bargaining rights often. They may not be representative because they're usually only supported by a few people. So you never know. It is really many people, even from the platform workers, don't like it what they do, and it's only a small group of them. Depends on the field. And then the OECD's right that all labor initiatives can kind of complement rather than substitute for traditional actors. So they are not necessarily competing with each other. And sometimes even, and as I just had the example with the German trade unions co-opting the Facebook site, they kind of can revitalize traditional trade unions. So one another aspect would be kind of general alternative forms of workers' voice we see, and one point would be kind of counter-evaluation, I would call it. And counter-evaluation, I mean, it's kind of the goal to level the playing field for the platform workers. Though there exist several initiatives which try to give workers and others the opportunity to rate platforms or the requesters, the people or the companies who are requesting the labor on these platform labors. So for instance, you have Turk-Opticon. It's kind of a browser tool or a homepage, and only for Amazon's Mechanical Turk. Amazon Mechanical Turk is one of these platforms where you have many of these micro jobs where you kind of only have to tag photos or something like this. And then when you work there, you always get evaluated. You kind of this star system, and the better you are, the more jobs you get, and so on. So usually only the requester can rate workers, and with this tool, it's also possible the other way around. The workers can rate the requesters to see where, or to warn other workers from bad requesters. And then we also have faircrowdwork.org, where workers can evaluate labor platforms, which is, by the way, a project from a traditional labor union. And you also have the probably well-known Fair Work Foundation, which is kind of similar to the Fair Trade Foundation and kind of assesses platforms in different countries and more countries, and evaluates them and give out these kind of information sheets, how many points a platform has, how fair this platform is, and so on. Then in some countries, you have forms of new mutualism. So it kind of works like the old concept of mutual aid societies, like a voluntary cooperation of individuals for insurance and so on. And best known is probably the Société Mutuelle pour les Artistes. It's called SMART. It comes from Belgium. It's also active in Italy. It was they had kind of a insurance scheme, or where you for food delivery riders and also some other platform workers, where platform workers who would usually be self-employed could get employed from this SMART, this mutualism company, and then work for the platform. So, and here you always have this kind of criticism that these initiatives, they kind of legitimize bad jobs and secure the existence of precarious structures, because the platforms, they did not have to do anything. So they still had the best of both worlds. So now they had self-employed workers who were employed at another company and did not cost them anything. So, and a third aspect would be, a third initiative would be platform cooperativism. You maybe heard of a very interesting part, which attempts to reproduce the labor and the services which are offered by the established platforms, but now in a kind of self-determined and fair way, so like a cooperative. So the goal is to kind of clone the platform's technology, but to apply it in a kind of a solidary framework of cooperatives. And there exist initiatives which try to kind of offer infrastructures for creating cooperative platforms. So there's, for instance, the Platform Cooperativism Consortium, which develops free software, because it's huge challenge for a small cooperative to develop the software themselves. And in general, this is kind of a really young movement, not cooperative in general, but platform cooperativism. And you only have few examples of cooperative labor platforms. And they are usually only locally bounded, local specific platform labor, and they are limited to often to individual cities. So you, for instance, have a taxi cooperative in Bologna, you have different food delivery platforms in Barcelona, in Berlin, in Brussels, and also, but also you have in the UK, you have, for instance, a platform for a cooperative platform for interpreting services for deaf people. When you look at these platform cooperatives, they have many challenges. They often, in many countries, there's lack of a legal framework. So legal framework for cooperatives depends on the country. And another challenge is the funding, of course, because these cooperatives, they are not startups and they promise no profits. And competing traditional platforms, the traditional competing platforms, they are usually backed up with venture capital. And so what we see here is, or what we could expect here, is that kind of a large scale establishment of cooperatives are kind of unlikely. They are likely remain local niche markets. So these are kind of the most important forms we see. Just to give a brief overview and come to a conclusion of this would be that platform labor, yes, it has come, it's only maybe 10 years old, but it's still here, and but the question is whether the precarious working conditions and the lack of representation, they stay too. And at the moment, we see kind of this back to the future scenario with platform labor. Platform labor, it kind of resembles the early capitalist working schemes with the kind of the putting out system, but which is now revitalized with modern technologies. So it's like the first era of capitalism now with algorithms. And with this comes this striking asymmetry of power, and also a lack of regulation we see in all of the countries. And now Chile may be one country where we have the first regulation of platform labor in the next month. And as I showed, platform workers, they are highly fragmented legally, spatially, organizationally, technologically, and socially. But nevertheless, there are different forms of worker voice in platform labor which can be observed. So we have these new communication networks, we have few collective agreements, trade unions on the search for new strategies. We have these emerging alt labor initiatives, and also new strategies, kind of this counter evaluation, also cooperatives. So, and what we also see is platform labor is in a field of constant change. It's a field of constant change. It's, in the last month and years, we saw in some countries kind of a form of institutionalization, where platforms moved, they kind of started to employ the workers in some cases, because it seems to be easier, and they easier to control, easier to hold, to keep the workers in this way. But yet we don't know how democratic platform labor will be in the future. But at the same time, the platform economy is kind of a unique laboratory for developing new models of worker representation, and also worker engagement. And the interesting thing here is that it's also additionally has kind of potential for translation into other non-standard models of work. With this, thank you for your attention, and I hope we have I'm interested in your questions and the discussion.
Yeah, Heiner, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. So we got time for questions now. I think it would be good if you could raise your hand digitally or maybe in person also. You could also write your question in the chat and I will try to read it out and pick it up. And first come, first serve. So any questions for Heiner? So Roberto, you want to go first?
Yes. So thank you for this talk. I mean, it's very interesting. I think your attempt to make this sort of typology of democratizing strategies for the platform, because I mean, or at least I was also struggling myself to answer the question: if you wanted to try to democratize a platform company, how would we go about it? Because traditional strategies do not seem to work very well, precisely for the reason that the kind of analogy between the state and the firm through which we usually think about democracy in the workplace doesn't really work, for the reason you mentioned, in the sense in which a traditional corporation, you can see in what sense it looks like a state, more or less, in the sense in which you can say that employees are the citizens of the firm, because they have this long time commitment, they work in the same space, they have they are a bunch of people under the same rule in the same space, and so you have a territory or something like a territory, you have a long time commitment, you have people governing you, and so the intuitive question, why shouldn't we be allowed to choose our governors, comes to the mind. But then you go into look at corporations, and as you said, you have a very small amount of people who really looks like the citizens of the firm, who are these very privileged employees who, as far as I know, usually have also a very high paycheck, very smart works and jobs, and but they quantitatively they do not represent really a significant share of citizens. And then you have this question: to what extent can we imagine that those people working part-time, completely scattered, often for very limited number of years, may look like citizens of the firm, and it's difficult to say in what way they do. And one thing, and maybe one question about which I wanted to ask you to say more is, you have basically three models of democracy, which according to me are more promising to go into this direction. One is the civil society, public sphere model. And maybe you have said something, maybe you could say more, in the sense in which we could imagine that intermediary or voluntary associations like NGOs, trade unions, or other types of may act as democratizing actors in pressuring platform from outside. Mm-hmm. Then the second model is a sort of purely liberal one, in which basically what democracy can achieve is simply, which is not so simple, strongly protect individual autonomy. And there you have exit right, which perhaps would require something like universal basic income, or a strong state protection in terms of salary protection for those who enter and exit the platform world, because of course that may be something which is relevant, or health schemes, or like in countries like, maybe not in the, you don't have this in US, but you have it in some European country like Italy or France, for example. You are still entitled to universal or almost universal health protection even if you don't work. So that would be along these lines. And the third model, which I don't consider so far, but which I found very interesting in your communication. So of these three, I mean, I would like to know what you think in general, and more specifically, if you could give me some more empirical evidence about this third one, which is internal communication in the sense of a sort of, once again, Habermasian deliberative sphere, which may exist among those scattered workers who at the beginning don't know each other, cannot communicate among themselves, don't even know they have colleagues with whom they may have a shared interest. But then, as you said, in fact, in some cases, you have chats, you have forums, you have other ways through which not only they can organize, but first and foremost, they at least have a deliberative forum into which they can discuss their problem, organize themselves, and so on and so forth. So I mean, I wanted to have some feedback on these ideas about the democratization of the workplace in alternative somehow ways compared to corporations.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. So it's really important point you pointed out there. I think the important thing is that platform labor is such a diverse phenomenon. So we have these huge, many different forms of platform labor, and you see this also with these forms of workers' voice. It was only a broad overview. You have this huge difference between if the platform labor is in a kind of a confined space in a city or so, where the people really can meet each other, and especially there we have the difference when you see the food delivery, right? They have the same clothes on. They meet sometimes at the restaurants or so, or when they start their shift. But then on the other hand, at the end you have these, I don't know how they are called, helpling or something like this, these private cleaners. Go from household to household. They can sit on the bus next to each other without knowing that they're both working for the same company. So this is really a huge difference. So you have this between all these platforms. So, and then so the first thing is that they first have to know that there are some chat groups, and then they have to go on these chat groups. And usually, and especially when you use work form, so the globally scattered form. So the people sit alone at home on their computer. They try to get info on how does this work. So when they go to these forums and these and so on, interest in these forums is mainly functional. They mainly try to make sense of how the information is, how this platform works, and so on. And there we also see the phenomenon that when we see these kind of forums and chats, that they could be all over the world, and people from all over the world could chat with each other and talk with each other. But then usually it's only people from one country. So they kind of reproduce these national borders online, where the people from the Philippines working for this same platform are only talking with each other, and there you have the people from the US are only talking with each other. And there it's really, that's even more difficult to get them to organize these people. So, and on the other hand, when you talked about this kind of public sphere form of democracy, yeah, we do also, and I didn't mention everything. We also have something, other forms like declarations and so on. And there are some platforms who try to do something. They try to use this model for labor, but at the same time they want to do something. They want to get out of this picture that they are the baddies and so on. They want to do better labor relations and like this, and labor for the people and for the workers. And there are these platforms. They exist, and sometimes you have this. Sometimes you have to, on the one hand, this high road of platform labor and this low road. And the platforms on the high road, and they really do care also on the evaluations from for instance, the Fair Work Foundation. The people from the low road, they do not care. The platform, it's kind of Uber or so. They do not care how the media, how the press is, and so on. So this one maybe a big difference we have. And then we also have to see how it will develop in the long run, because I just briefly talked about it, that all these platforms are venture capital backed. So it's a reason. It's not only a the reason is not only technology that we now have, that these platforms popped up after the big financial crisis, but also the huge amounts of money looking for investment. All the huge amount of venture capital, and is now pouring into these platforms. So none of these platforms, none worldwide, none of these platforms, labor platforms, is now having profits really. So all of these, they are writing losses at billions of losses. So that's really a big point. So
thanks.
Roberto, if you got okay, you don't have a follow-up. Are there any other questions, Heiner? Yeah, we got 2 more questions. I think Safriel was first, and then we got Ella and Hugo Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Heiner, for this fascinating talk. It was super thought-provoking, and my own research is in political theory of the firm, so I'm particularly looking for the mechanism behind this. So one of the most interesting things you said was that you had this observation that we kind of have returned to early capitalist structures now via this system. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, because it seems to me that going from hierarchies to markets in the Samuelsonian sense, you kind of externalize governance, right, to a mechanism or to an algorithm or something like that, and that's the cause of why workers are competing with each other instead of with the market itself, say. But this is a very different phenomenon from, I'm thinking of big metal factories or something where where dozens of workers are working on a tool or something. So I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that observation a little bit.
Yeah. So sorry, as it was just a brief point, but thank you very much for the question. So I can elaborate on this, because what I meant is more like this the traditional putting out system, before the big factories. So where you at work, you worked on your at home, on yourself or with your family, you get all the things you I don't know, the linen or something, the stuff you had to do to work on, or the metal you get from someone, from a salesman, and he brought it to your home, or you picked it up, you worked on it, and then you brought it back with your own. You had the stuff you had to do, you get it from him, but you had your own stuff you worked with, and so on. And then you kind of sell it back to him. This is kind of the uncanny resemblance we have here. Now we have it with digital forms, but it's now pretty much the same. So people have to use their own equipment and work for the platform. Platform only mediates and sells then the labor and the product to someone else. So this is kind of what I meant. So it's not close to factories in this sense. So it's more like that we. The maybe 30 golden years of Fordism and the golden years after the Second World War were really more like, puts it into perspective as a brief episode where it really the social dialogue and representation in Western countries for white men. So but not for the general people, and it's eroding more and more. So it's more like this platform labor is one piece in this general trend we saw since decades. So
yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I think I don't know what the first name is, but Hella from the Hugo Sensheimer Institute has another question, I guess.
Yes, my name is Johannes Höller, and I'm a PhD student from the Hugo Sensheimer Institute, and I'm working also on collectivity in the platform economy. And my question is, I would be interested in how to bridge the gap between the grassroots movements and the established trade unions. How can we create incentives to bring the two parties together? This is what I'm interested in.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very interesting and important question, and also a difficult one, because as you probably all know, as you expected, these two different groups of actors and different forms of trade unions are often do not well with each other. They usually, often they are more in conflict with each other because the one criticizes the other because of this and so on. So this is more like on the ideology level. But when you look at the level, really a practical, everyday kind of work struggles, then what we see is that we really often see that they can sometimes work hand in hand. So, yeah. And they really, and then it depends on really much on individuals, and there are sometimes the organization behind them, from either the bigger trade unions or also the smaller grassroots anarcho-syndicalist unions. They're kind of almost kind of more a barrier hindering them to really to work together. We see it in many different fields. I just did some research on the gorillas. Gorillas is not like a platform, but it's also kind of these instant food and everyday things delivery you have in bigger cities. You have it, it's called in every country, in every big city, called different. And see exactly this, that you have this small anarcho-syndicalist union again. And we also have a self-organized workers collective, and we have a traditional trade union. And we have two traditional trade unions in this kind of work struggle, and they can cooperate on very practical terms. So, and then sometimes it's also the problem from the different ideologies. So in some of the bigger trade unions, you are the trade union secretary are sometimes not even allowed to cooperate with anarcho-syndicalist unions because they question the traditional union system in general. At least in Germany, it's like this. So I think in other countries we have a more diverse system and fear of trade unions. So I don't know how it's there a problem. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So I got one comment from Jan Linde. It's a long one, I guess. Everybody should probably read it for themselves now, and because I think it's not a question, right? Not correct. So I would just jump in there and ask a question myself. You mentioned that the kind of algorithmic management is a huge challenge for the workers to basically organize any form of voice and even communicate on a regular basis. So I was wondering if you got any kind of approach or idea. I don't know if that's the right question for somebody who's working from a sociological perspective, but how could we empower workers to deal with those black boxes? Like, what could be ideas to kind of overcome the black box in a way? Should there be some veto rights when the algorithmic management stuff, when we develop the algorithm, or how can we establish worker voice or empowerment when we got this kind of new form of management that's clearly so undermining of the voice?
Yeah, thank you. It's really a big challenge, and it's the maybe funny or maybe a more complex thing about this is that, and this is also a challenge for sometimes the companies, because these algorithms, they are not that easy. So the first thing would be, okay, just open up the black box, make it transparent. So, and look into it. Okay, they do not, it's trade secret. Okay, then you have them. Okay, maybe like in Spain, you have it like a law, or tries to do it with a law that, okay, you have someone only one person or a few persons who can look into the algorithm and can check the algorithms if they are okay. So this could be an option, and this could be a nice option and good. But at the same time, it comes with other problems, because especially these self-learning algorithms, you cannot see, and it's not like you can open the box and you see how they work. They only work in practice. So you usually see how they work in practice, what they do in practice, because sometimes the programmers, they only see it themselves because the algorithm are self-learning. So you, on the one hand, you should open the black box, and this is, if it's possible, you could do this with regulation, of course. And there are initiatives to try to do this. And on the other hand, you have to need something like a report system where workers can know that can send a message when the algorithm does this and that, or where there comes a problem from this. And when I did research on especially algorithmic management, I also saw that many of the workers, it's one of the most important things the platform workers are talking with each other is about how does this algorithm work. So because it really controls their everyday work practices. So, and they have these many theories about the algorithms, and usually they have many theories, they are much worse than the reality. So they think of these algorithms are controlling every single aspect and down to the detail. And in many aspects and in many forms, because I did research at different platforms, and I was lucky to get insight into how these algorithms work. But the platforms, they did not make it transparent to their workers. So the workers, they talked a lot with each other and talked a lot, how does this work, and really for the worst of these algorithms. And the platforms, actually, the most of the platforms, they knew that the workers are thinking about these strange things, how the algorithm works. Did not do anything because it wasn't when the workers, it's like this typical sociological Thomas theorem. So important, or it's real, and not this is real, or it's real. And real is it's what you think if it's real. And when the worker thinks this is real, they act like it is real. So, and then they act like they are more controlled and so on, and do not resist and so on. This is really a big important thing, and this additionally comes to mind when you look at algorithmic management and with the problems to try to regulate it.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a huge problem too, and really a challenge. Because I mean, the business model sometimes also depends on the algorithm, right?
Yeah.
So how to make it transparent without, making make the company suffer in some way.
I guess definitely. And you also have a thing that many of these and many, especially in Germany, but also in other countries, you have employment law. You have a law which says something about what has to be done when a new technology comes into a work process and so on. But if there's no one who look at this law, if there's not a works council or shop steward and so on, who looks at it and says something against it, then then it's a problem. So because especially for instance in Germany, you have a very strong law when you introduce a new technology into a work process, but without the works council who can check this law, so it does nothing. It does not work.
Yeah. So I think Roberto is next. Another question.
Yeah, I have a question, but I will ask it later. This is more of a follow-up of your discussion about the algorithm. I was wondering, since you said you had this field work where you could basically see how the algorithm works. I was wondering whether you had a conversation with managers there or people, whether there is a debate or whether you exchange with them concerning the condition under which algorithm could be made transparent to workers, to employee, whether they don't do it for strategic reason, whether they don't do for legal protection of the copyright concerning the. I mean, there is of course an intellectual property issue about how they go about it. So just to know to what extent, which are the constraints that do such that in fact algorithm remains black boxes for whether, I mean, or there are studies or practice, good practices about making them transparent. I mean, how is the situation in general?
Actually what you really can find really much when you talk to these people managing these algorithms or developing its own, is that what Morozov calls the solutionism. So the idea that you can solve many problems you have in social reality with digital technology. So, and here it's the idea that you can many problems lack of the coordination of work processes you can solve with technology, and therefore these algorithms are really important for them. Actually, they are important, of course, they are important, but they are not that important. So, but for them they are, and this really for them also is a kind of a copyright reason. So, and not to give the other platforms in their field an insight into their algorithms. So and at the same time, you really can follow how these algorithms develop. And in the beginning, they were not self-learning. Now they are. And in the beginning, they were sometimes really. In the beginning, many of the algorithms were kind of stupid. So they did decisions who were not smart. And you also have these, actually you also have these kind of data janitors. There has to be a human in the loop you can turn to when the algorithm does something which does not work or is not smart or so. And especially in the beginning, it becomes much better now. I don't know what better means here, but actually in the beginning, there were these people were really much needed, and they get a lot of calls they sit in the office and get calls from all over the country or so. This and that is not working. What should I do? And they were the only ones who can intervene into the algorithm to say the algorithm something that he has to do now this and that because that's not working. So yeah.
Okay, so the question itself was a bit different. It concerned the I mean, I was thinking into this to this question of the platform cooperativism because it seems to be very, very trendy, and because it looks like an easy but just unworkable solution to me. So basically, I was interested. I'm still interested in understanding to what extent it isn't the wrong question, in the sense in which, once again, it assumes that you can more or less bring back the platform to the kind of Fordist organization of work. Whereas I was wondering, and this is more of an empirical question, I am under the impression that this is the wrong question because simply this is not the way platforms are going to evolve, in the sense in which you may succeed with Uber, for example, to force it to transform self-employed into employees, but you won't control all the platform world, because, for example, with mechanical turks or this platform into which jobs are tasks are so fragmented, it doesn't make any sense to be to own a share into a company into which you may work for 5 minutes every 2 weeks. So and also related to this, I mean, my understanding by reading the literature is that in fact you have also sort of big cleavage between those people who work part-time maybe as a second job in the platform system, and those who try to have full-time jobs in the platform system. And you basically said platform aren't for full-time. So of course the democratizing question has a different meaning if you ask it with reference to people for whom this is the main source of income, the job they do 8 hours a day, or if you ask the question for people who are simply doing a ride 2 hours per day and they maybe do it for 5 years, or similar things. So I was interested in the sociological data concerning the ratio between those who do full-time jobs or looks for full-time jobs in the platform world compared to those who do it only part-time, and whether you see some trends in the evolution. For example, the new kind of platforms, are they more like Uber, where people may try to have a full-time job, or the trend is nevertheless to use the platform for many more people working on platform but for shorter durations? How is the data?
What I see in the data and what I experience is that you have both, and you have both in different groups of people. And this is another aspect we didn't talk about, is the huge amount, the importance of class and the huge amount of migrant labor. So you have, on the one hand, and it also depends on which kind of labor you also have, and it's usually at the same time, platform labor is an urban phenomenon, so pretty much in bigger cities. So, and you have this one part social group which consists of students, younger people doing this job because it's like interesting on doing this for a year, half a year, and they're gone when it doesn't suit them very well. So it's like more like an additional income. And then they have the other social group, and three often migrants or lower class workers. They are doing platform labor because the really low entrance barrier into this labor. Actually, you do not even have to speak the language in the country you are. you have to speak English. So because in the app you can just turn on the settings and switch to English and so. And the only thing you usually have to is you need an, I don't know, you need a mobile, you need a bicycle or a car, or I don't know where you, or a computer, depends on which platform you work. And then you can start, and then you have to need that you're allowed to work in this country when it's on local specific platforms. So these are the only things, and therefore you have a lot of really people of migrant labor in this field, especially in this local bounded platform labor. And in Germany we also have at the point where sometimes really important is also that there can be the platforms, they work on local, these are, as I said, urban phenomena, so local labor markets. They have to get workers from their local city, and sometimes when they are well known from all the students, and so that they are not a good employer, they sometimes really had problems. And then in Germany they went to refugee centers to get workers on their platforms. And this was also the point where we see that some platforms switch to employ the workers, because it's really also for the platforms, the high fluctuation of the workers is really a problem. It's really a challenge that you have the highest point in Germany, the platforms I surveyed, we had the typical amount of time a worker stayed on the platform was 3 months. So this is really not a lot. So this really only these few weeks, and then you have to get so much resources into recruiting people, and to give people I don't know, introduction into the work and so on. And this is really a point, and especially at the moment where many jobs and many workers are leaving bad jobs and so on. This is really a point where I think this trend of institutionalization, it's really a small trend we see, that some platforms are switching to employ the workers is coming from. And of course, at the same time, it's different when you look at the global scale, but there we also have a global labor market. And then you also see that it can be for people from third world countries, it can be an option to get into labor markets from first and second world countries. And at the same time, it's of course it's exploitation from nothing new, like now it's digitalized, so from the first world of third world countries.
So are there any other questions from the audience for Heiner right now? If not, I would just make your probably last question then. We talked a bit about the platform cooperative movement, and you mentioned some of the challenges they are facing. And I was like, you mentioned one of the challenges was funding, right? So I guess most of these kind of platform companies, they have some venture capital coming and funding them, and you get some algorithm. And I was wondering, isn't there also kind of a flip side to that, in the way that actually to fund the platform, you don't need that much capital compared to some big industrial company in a way. Do you think there's some opportunity also in that, if people are getting more aware of the fact that in a more idealistic way they can organize together if they got some nice algorithm? It's like a kind of easy way to say it, but do you think there's some potential to get around the funding barrier in this platform cooperative movement?
It depends. I would say not at the moment, because as long as the venture capital, as the traditional labor platforms are funded and are venture capital backed, and also a cooperative platform, they are always in competition with the traditional platforms, and none of these traditional platforms, as I said, are profitable. So they can undercut every time these kind of new cooperative platforms. So the market is for these cooperative platforms is really, and that's where you see where they are. It's mainly a kind of a small niche where they are, and you have these in bigger cities where you have these especially the social groups working with it. And one example would be when in Germany, one bigger platform left the market. It was Deliveroo, and then there was this vacuum, and there a platform cooperative developed, and they started. And in the beginning, they didn't even have something like an algorithm. You had to order via WhatsApp or something like this. And you could order in this small part of Berlin. And when I talked to one of the founders, he said to me that, yeah, in the beginning, we had more questions and more phone calls from the press, from the media, then we had actual orders. So yeah, they had the high interest from a specific kind of social groups, and especially of course social the media, but then the actual the actual interest, and that the people are interested in ordering or using these kind of platforms is really only for a small group and small niche.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So if we don't have any further questions, since we are a pretty small audience, I would say thank you, Heiner, for the very interesting talk and the nice Q&A session. And we will close this session. And I will